prejudice, to discharge the duties entrusted to us to the common good and as in your sight, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Please have a seat. I don't think we have any apologies this evening, so are there any declarations of interest? Councillor Miles.
Mr Mayor, I have a non-significant, non-pecuniary interest in item 4.1, given that one of the items being approved under the delegation is a neighbour of mine.
Thank you, Councillor Miles. Are there any others? I believe we have a speaker for an item that's not on the agenda tonight. Would you please come forward? Dr. Sharp.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Tonight I'm here to urge you to budget for a review of Council's bike plan. You've probably all heard about the bike plan because it was raised at a couple of meetings last year. There was a bit of a murmur about it in 2013. Quite a lot talked about it in 2001 when we first decided to have a bike plan, and at the end of 2004 it came to this meeting to be adopted. So what's a bike plan and why do we need one? Lane Cove Council on its website says that its bike plan is a comprehensive plan for supporting physical activity, active living and active ageing, as promoted in Council social plan and other Council policy, strategy and planning instruments. So it's not just about bikes, it's about people. Shouldn't Huddersfield be doing the same as Lane Cove? You don't have to be amalgamated with them to do the same thing. So we do have a bike plan. I couldn't find any mention of it on Council's website. There's a few other references to cycling, but I know when I brought it up at the Public Transport and Traffic Advisory Committee, the committee had a lot of trouble finding it in the archives of the Council's papers, which is a bit of a pity because cycling, it's not just fun, it's not just good for children, it actually is the quickest way of getting around on shorter distances. And tomorrow I have to go into town to see a dentist. I'll be riding my bike in because then I don't have to worry about the timetable and about the bus being early or the bus being late, and I can park right outside my dentist's door. Strange enough, it's a lot easier, safer, feels better riding into the city than it does riding over the overpass here. The overpass is a bit of a scare. You'll see lots of people riding on the road, mixing with the traffic. Young people and not so young people, and especially early in the morning, men dashing around. And that's terrific. They don't need any extra help. The people who need the extra help are just ordinary people who want to go to school or to the shops or to visit friends or just to go for a ride because it makes you fit, makes you hungrier, it makes you feel better at dinner time. So in 2001, Council got a grant from the RTA, as it was then, because the RTA encourages bike plans. Indeed, on their website, they say, they have a booklet, a 60-page booklet about how to prepare a bike plan, which was updated not so long ago. But it warns that most bike plans are less likely to be relevant after 5 years. And that's because there are changes to regulation, there are changes to rules governing cars.
Dr. Sharp, are you nearly finished?
I am very nearly finished.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
So, many people think that cycling is a bit dangerous, and there is indeed no low-stress legal way to cycle over the overpass. And getting to Gladesville Bridge is both tortuous and strenuous. It needn't be. So that's it. I'm hoping that Council will favour the review of the bike plan and place this on the budget. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sharp. I think we have a number of people in the room who are interested in
good.
bikes and will be quite supportive of your idea.
Good.
So thank you. Councillor Craswell, do you have a question of Dr. Sharp?
I have a question of you, Mr. Mayor, but thank you, Dr. Sharp, for the presentation. I'm just curious because I'm not sure how you raise a thing at this point of a meeting, but I'd be interested to know what the step would be to ask the councillors to support having the bike plan put on this year's budget.
Okay, well, we can bring it back after. I don't think we need to do it right now, but
Okay.
Yep, Councillor Miles.
Sharp. Are you saying that the main issue, and I'm just for your from your cycling experience, the main issue is the overpass and getting onto Victoria Road or onto the bridge from Hunters Hill?
No, the overpass is just an example. For a start, I wouldn't encourage anybody to cycle on Victoria Road. It's too scary. And the reason that I don't like cycling to the city is that I don't cycle on Victoria Road. All through Des Moines, it's just by luck, there's an alternative route. It runs parallel to Victoria Road on the side streets. Once you get to Iron Coat Bridge, the footpath is designated as a shared path. We have a couple of paths here. You might notice some fairly worn out paint logos on them. And that was from the first bike plan. It's possible to designate pretty much any footpath because at the moment only people under 12 years old or adults riding as people under 12 years old are allowed to ride on footpaths, unlike in ACT and some of the other states. That's something the council can't fix, but the council can do things with a bit of white paint on the road to remind cars that there are cyclists around.
And even if you do use the pathways, once you get down to the bridge, you actually have to get off your bike and use the stairs, don't you?
Yeah, that's something I've been battling the road authority with since 1981. In the year 2000, they actually funded the full engineering design of a little overpass that popped you over the slipland. And in 2004, they did another one, but then they never budgeted the money to build them. Yeah, but that's not so much a local, I mean, it is a local problem, but it's a problem for all the commuters who rush up and down there, all the school kids who come over there to come to high school, and all the girls who go over the other way to go to Riverside.
Thank you, Dr. Sharp.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I think I should have gone to the minutes first. My apologies. But move Councillor Williams, seconded Councillor Miles. Everybody in favour of those minutes of the last meeting? That's carried. Thank you. Got a bit excited about the bikes. We move on to 3.1 Bushland Advisory Management, and I believe we have a speaker for this, Mr. Robert Hayes. Welcome.
Thank you very much. As Council knows,
you have 3 minutes, Mr. Hayes.
Right, thank you. As you all know, Council has multiple legislative and other obligations regarding bushland management and protection of biodiversity and natural areas. These arise from the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act, the Biodiversity Conservation Act and the Local Government Act, as well as bushland requirements and guidance arising from at least 6 planning instruments, such as LEPs. The statutory obligations are specific and mandatory. For example, the Local Government Act specifies that Council must, in summary, manage and maintain its bushland, conserve and protect natural area ecological biodiversity, habitat values, flora and fauna, and ecosystem function, preserve natural features or habitats in their natural state, restore and regenerate degraded bushland, protect existing landforms, minimise human disturbance, and retain viable bushland parcels, and indeed much more. This requires major effort, resources and commitment by the Council, and is best done collaboratively with the community. For decades, Council has benefited from the vast expertise, experience, local knowledge, unpaid time and regular volunteer work of voluntary bush care groups. Meeting council statutory obligations is such an important, specific and complex undertaking that a standalone bushland management advisory committee with a specific focus on bushland management and biodiversity is essential and proposed. The advisory committee would continue to assist council by helping it formulate and implement strategies and actions to meet their statutory obligations. Secondly, by promoting volunteering, helping to obtain grants and helping to optimise value for money. And thirdly, advising council of community views and making recommendations where appropriate. All northern councils, we're told, with significant bushland have bushland management advisory committees in partnership with the community, whose input is highly valued and successful. This role cannot be effectively performed as part of a committee with a broader focus on, for example, streetscape or public landscaping. Bushland management is totally different. It requires special focus and expertise. The advisory committee would be standalone, however, it would importantly act collaboratively with any other such committees where relevant. Overall, we support the motion and terms of reference proposed tonight by Councillors Sanderson and Williams. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hayes. 2 minutes, 46 seconds, perfect.
I've been practising.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we have another speaker, Ms. Heather Armstrong. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. Mr. Hayes has said everything that needs to be said, but just a couple of things. That bushland management is much more than just about managing weed control. It is, under the legislation, a very broad endeavour indeed, starting at the highest level of biodiversity preservation and enhancement, moving down to specific objectives concerning bushland management. It's not a simple undertaking. And in the past, if I can respectfully say this, bushland management in this council, under this council, has suffered due to its very low profile. It had a working party which soldiered on, continued to work under the conditions we had, but we need to do better than that. We need a properly constituted bushland management advisory committee in order to take account of the breadth of the obligations which council has to fulfil its legislative charter. Councillor Sanderson, in his notice of motion, has included the relevant legislation. I hope you've had a chance to look at it, but just briefly, you can't pretty much go higher than Section 1.3 of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. Objects of the Act, subsection 1.3e, to protect the environment, including the conservation of threatened and other species of native animals and plants, ecological communities and their habitats. Of course, you're aware that we have 4 endangered ecological communities within our 30 hectares of land in Hunter's Hill Council. The Local Government Act has very specific legislative charter as to what should be done to preserve and protect the environment. And it's not just about looking after what we've got, it's about enhancing what we've got. It's about restoring degraded bushland. It's about protecting the biosphere, not just pulling out weeds. This is much broader than that. It encompasses a far broader range of activities. Now, for that reason, that's why we're proposing, I certainly support the motion, that there should be a standalone committee which deals with these objectives. Of course, no problem with working with other committees and taking requests for advice or collaboratively working with anybody else. But nonetheless, this is a very important legislative charter. Section 36J of the Local Government Act 1993, core objectives: ensure the ongoing ecological viability of the land by protecting the ecological biodiversity and habitat values of the land, flora, fauna, including invertebrates, everything from big animals, wherever they might be, down to bugs in the ground. We have a very broad obligation here, and it's been something that's been pushed under the rug for a long time by Council in my respectful submission, and it needs now to be given the appropriate weight it deserves. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Councillor, are there any questions? Thank you. Please have a seat. So we move to the motion. Councillor Sanderson. Moved. Seconded. Councillor Williams. Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wish I had the time to prepare as our speakers have for their very good presentations tonight. The way we've been rushing around this evening, I haven't had that opportunity. However, I'll start by saying that at the time that Council dissolved the former working party, there was good reason for it. We had a party that didn't have terms of reference, didn't have any council members, and there were instances of it straying into areas that it shouldn't have. It should have been it should have been a advisory committee, I think, from its very outset. That way it would have had the appropriate terms of reference, which it hadn't had previously. It would have had, I hope, councillor members who would have kept it in touch with council and more connected and probably given it a better voice in terms of the messages that, the important messages that are going to come from it. I didn't go as deeply into the legislation as Armstrong did tonight, but I based my research into this largely on our obligations under the Local Government Act. They're quite clear. Now, the other thing is, I mean, council, I think, at the time that the former working party was dissolved, always intended to replace it with another body, and that body would be a committee of council, an advisory committee of council, rather than a working party. The difficulty we had was the scope. And I think with the scope, I think we had a vision that perhaps we could expand this into something a bit broader, and that would be beneficial to our streetscapes and so on, and useful in terms of creating the corridors that are necessary to link the bushland that we have. When I had a look at the Local Government Act, that seemed to clarify why we shouldn't have a committee that is of a broader scope. Because you look at what we have to do in our obligations in making plans of management, it's extremely important that we try to stick with the objectives that are given under the Act. Now, they seem to come under two classes. One of the classes would be that in terms of the core objectives for management of natural areas, they tend to prioritise protection, maintenance and, where possible, restoration of natural features including biodiversity, ecological viability and mitigating any disturbance caused by human intrusion. On the other hand, if you look at the objectives for management of sports grounds, parks, areas, general community use, etc., they prioritise encouragement, promotion and facilitation, sorry, I got that word wrong, of recreational pursuits. So the difficulty comes with a broader committee. We'll have to have representatives from the other areas. The result will be that's going to dilute the aims of a bushland group. At the same time, I support our speakers tonight with the notion that this group should have the ability, not necessarily to make recommendations to council, but to provide advice which can assist us, because this council has a huge obligation. We have to make new plans of management basically for all of our community land, I believe, under the more recent legislation with Crown lands, that we will need to have plans of management in place by the 20th of June, the end of June 2021. So we've got a lot of work to do in that space. At the same time, I think council itself is going to have to take on a greater responsibility, and I personally certainly would welcome the advice from groups like the Bush Care or the Bushland Management Advisory Committee that this motion proposes to establish. I don't see anything controversial about this motion. I think all councillors have I think universally have a strong support for all of our sporting bodies. We all want to see our sporting facilities developed in a way that's more inclusive, and in particular more inclusive of women's sport. And I don't see that protecting our natural areas in this way is going to impede on that in any way. I think one of the good things about this this proposal will allow this new committee, even if it's transformed from an older type of committee, it will allow that committee to concentrate on its core expertise. And it is absolutely essential that we do something like this, apart from the obligations we have under legislation, we've heard some appalling news over the last week or so about loss of species in particular in Australia. So this is just a starting point, and I think a committee, the committee that this motion proposes, will be highly valuable to Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. Would anybody like to speak against the motion? Nothing? Sorry? Oh, thank you. Anybody wishing to speak for the motion? Councillor McLaughlin.
Yes, I'll speak for the motion. I think this is a great motion, and it's taken a little while to get here, and I'm disappointed that it took this long, but we have had a change in personnel, so things have been a bit slow. I just want to say that the bush care volunteers that we have are some of the most important volunteers that we have for in our council. And this council, over the years, could not have done what it's done without having the bush care volunteers. They have been invaluable. So I think I think they deserve to have this kind of uplift in the recognition that they're going to get from becoming a proper council committee. I think that they should be able to make recommendations to council as every other committee does. So I welcome the change. I thank Councillor Sanderson for bringing this to council, and Councillor Williams for bringing it to council, and the bush care for bringing it to council. You are very important to us. Don't think that we don't understand that. But it is. I'm hoping that now we'll be moving ahead for you.
Anybody wishing to speak against? For? Part of the motion the General Manager pointed out to me is we need two councillors. Should we proceed with the motion until we accept the motion and then see if we can find two councillors? I think we need to accept the motion first. I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? That's carried. May I also say, and I've said it before, I apologise for the haste with which we closed down the committee. I don't think it was done in bad faith. I think it was done with a view to review things. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to do it fast enough. So please accept my apologies. It hadn't occurred to me at the time that it would take so long, and I understand your angst at that, so thank you. The next part of the motion is that we, two councillors, be nominated as representatives for the Bushland Management Advisory Committee, one who will be chair. Councillor Williams?
I'd like to nominate myself.
Seconded, Councillor Sanderson. Anybody else wish to nominate for that committee? Councillor Sanderson. Seconded, Councillor Krasoi. Anybody wishing to nominate for this committee? Anybody wishing to nominate somebody else for the committee? So we have two nominations, Councillor Williams, Councillor Sanderson. All in favour? That's carried. Thank you. Let that be noted. Councillor Collins.
Can I bring forward 7.1?
7. Second. 7.1, we have a speaker for that, Mr. Grote. Oh, there you are. Right. Welcome. Nice to see you.
Thank you. Am I the only person speaking to 7.1?
Yes, sir. Oh, no, there's two. There's another one too.
Okay.
There are perhaps even two more speakers after you. Okay. So we have 3 minutes.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to say.
Please go ahead.
Look, I think after a couple of rounds of public consultation, the proposal has kind of got to where it had to be. So certainly we support it. Neighbours across the street support it. Neighbours to the west of number 42 seem to support it, although I might find out differently after the next person or two. Item 2 of the recommendation, Council investigates staggered parking for the remaining 2 zones outside the shared zone as per Council resolution of the 12th of March. Since 2015, this new round of parking issues, our section of the road has seemed to got pretty comfortable with parking on one side of the street. It seems to work fine. So we're going to be excluded from the shared zone, which we're happy with. We only have a problem when visitors park on the opposite side when somebody upsets the apple cart. So for us, even though recommendation 2 is not really the main focus of this 7.1, we hope that when the shared zone sort of gets bedded down, that we don't neglect item 2, and that's all I have to say. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Councillors, any questions? Please stay with us just for... Councillors, any questions, Mr. Groff? Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Anthony Hope, would you like to speak? Christine.
Speaking for breakfast.
All right, thank you. Ms. Christina Chow.
That's right. Thank you for this opportunity to address Council this evening. I'd like to reiterate our preference that there is no change to the street at all, that there is no shared zone, and that people stick with the existing parking requirements. Number 16 and number 14 are both here, and they also feel the same way. One of the things that the report actually says that our road is inconsistent with adjacent streets. However, Abigail Street is similarly narrow, and residents have managed to organise themselves respectfully and park on one side of the road. However, based on all the consultation that has been held, we do appreciate that we have been listened to in some ways, and that the shared zone proposal is it's shorter. I would like to understand if it can be even shorter if it is going to go ahead in the same way. Although we are outside the shared zone at number 12, we do feel that having a shared zone does impact on the accessibility for all residents in the street. And there was a couple of things that we'd like to clarify. From the last meeting that we attended, there was a sort of a guiding principle that was put forward by most residents that were in attendance to minimise the impact from a shared zone being in place in terms of signage and traffic calming initiatives that would be recommended. So I wanted to understand whether that had been fully considered, and also to understand what the reduction in parking would be on the street based on the current proposal. I think that's all.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor McLaughlin.
Just a question for you, Mr Mayor, to Mr Previs. Could you
Could we just start? Are there any questions of the Speaker, please? Please, Councillor Miles.
Get one in through you, Mr Mayor. Saying that there should be no change to the shared zone obviously means that there would either be no change to the parking arrangement as is now would mean that it's essentially the residents will have to either not park on the street or not park illegally, because obviously the problem has been that the police have been down there booking people not.
No, I understand that. Yeah. So they just have to park.
Yeah, they have to park. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, thank you very much. Please have a seat.
Thank you.
I think you have some questions. We have the consultant here, Ms. Terry Lawrence. Would you mind coming forward just for a moment? Thank you. And Councillor McLaughlin, did you have a question of the consultant?
Oh, just for Ms Chow's benefit, what the reduction in parking spaces will be?
Well,
this proposal.
the total with the shared zone 27, that would be 27 legal spaces. You have less than that now because people park on the footpath and it's illegal. So what we found is that in the surveys we did, there was somewhere between 16 and 22 on-street parking by residents, including and plus some people parking in their driveway, half on their property, half in the driveway. Of those 16 to 22, approximately half of them parked on the footpath that was illegal. So you'd have to conclude the residents, in their own view, felt it was unsafe to park fully on the road. So it's less than 27 spaces.
Thank you.
All right, we have a couple more questions, and I might ask Mr. Karipis to direct those questions from you.
Through you, Mayor. The question was the signposting, proliferation of signposting, and what consideration you're taking on board?
Well, you have to have the signposting for the shared zone. It's part of the RMS requirements. Because the shared zone's a 10 kilometre speed limit, the RMS are the ones we're actually going to decide. that you have to have the signposting. What we've got is some entry signs, shared zone, and we've got a repeater sign because of the length of it's 270 metres. So that's a requirement of the RMS, part of the technical direction. In terms of whether we looked at shortening it, well, it started off at close to 400 metres and it's down to 270. And I think you were at the meeting where it was generally agreed that we would start it in that, well, I know number 16 didn't agree to that, but it was generally agreed that that would be the length. That's the narrower section of Bonifan Road. That's where that formed the basis of the concept design we have now.
All right, thank you. I'll allow you to ask one more question.
Thank you. I know that you've shortened it, which we appreciate, but what we're trying to understand is, can it be any shorter? Like, is that the shortest it can be under?
There's no overall length. There's no overall length to it. You can make it as short. You can make it 100 metres if you want to, or 15 metres, or 20 metres. But it's for the purpose that if people are going to park on a footpath, that's illegal. It blocks the footpath. It blocks the footpath for pedestrians. So the whole point was to, in that narrower section where people were parking on the footpath, was to basically allow them to park on the footpath under the shared zone. They park partly on the footpath, partly on the road, and then we'd still have a carriageway wide enough for passing lanes in certain locations, not everywhere, and for a truck, fire appliance, garbage truck, whatever, to go up and down the road. So.
Okay, councillors, do you have any more questions? Councillor Crasloy.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Can you tell me, so in the shared zone, I walked the street with a lady who has a daughter with a disability on the street who uses a wheelchair. And she had possibly misunderstood. She thought that the shared zone meant that the cars could now be on the road and her daughter would be able to use her wheelchair safely along the footpath, which isn't the case. So when we walked it, she was trying to understand when she comes out of her house, how will her daughter safely get onto the road to manoeuvre her wheelchair along the road through the shared zone and then back off the road.
Under a shared zone, pedestrians have priority. So if a car must give way to a pedestrian, and cyclists must give way to a pedestrian. So effectively, if the person's on the wheelchair and is going down the shared zone, then the car has to give way to it. So either has to pull over and let the wheelchair pass, or wait for the wheelchair to pass it. So that's the...
And getting onto the road, because the design of a lot of our driveways and gutters are such that it's actually quite difficult to get a bike off it, let alone a wheelchair.
It depends where she's coming on. We haven't looked specifically at that location, but normally most wheelchairs come onto a road where there's a gutter crossing, where there's a physical gutter crossing. It could be, if this lady lives in that street, you could put a particular a what we call a curb ramp down and make it compliant to Australian standards. That could be part of the detailed design, providing the designers knew about that.
Thank you.
Councillor Crasloy.
Through you to Mr. Karepis, Mr. Mayor, please. Can you help me? It's gone. It went.
Okay.
Oh no, it was really important though.
We can come back to them. Any other questions from other councillors?
Oh, I remembered. Sorry, we were talking about the cars parking on the footpath, and it was briefly mentioned that some cars park sort of on their driveways with their backsides angled onto the footpath. So even in the sections of the path where there isn't a car on the footpath, there's a car in their driveway with its bum on the footpath. Is that now in a shared zone going to be legal? I mean, I know it's not now, but they...
You're saying that through you, Mayor, if a vehicle is parked on the layback of the driveway,
crossing the footpath.
If it's fully blocking the footpath, it probably isn't legal, but I don't think they would get booked if they're partly on their property. The whole point of the shared zone is that pedestrians can walk on the road, so that the footpath's not technically blocked. In terms of on-street parking, basically parallel parking, the people have got to park in the allocated spots. They're line marked spots. They're Australian standard size, 2.1 by 6 metres long. They have to park in those spaces. So anyone who parks outside those spaces, that's illegal.
Very good. Thank you very much. So If there's any further question, councillor, we can take it on notice and come back. Thank you very much. Do we have a mover for the motion? Councillor Williams, seconded Councillor Miles. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This issue has been a very, very long one that's spanned over many council periods and has caused a lot of concern both to residents and to the enforcement authorities in terms of meeting the obligations of parking legally. And if nothing is done, then the residents will have minimal parking that would be legal. And the current approach that's taken by some residents in parking on the footpath would then be prone to being fined for those activities, as has happened in the past. Because this has been a long issue, I think council has made every effort to engage, consult, involve and listen to all the residents in that street. Like with everything we do, we're never going to get 100% agreement, but I think in particularly that last meeting we had with a large number of the residents, I think most residents were there, that there was a consensus for the approach that we're taking now. And it was fine-tuned as a result of that meeting and the discussion, and we've now got this proposal before us. So I think we've got to a stage now where we can give a clear indication to the RMS and to the residents as to what is a workable solution, and see what the RMS decision is in relation to it, and hopefully it's a positive one, and we can move forward in the future to meet the needs of the majority of residents in that location.
Thank you, Councillor. Anybody wishing to speak against? Against? Councillor Cresswell.
Mr. Mayor, I want to speak against it. I know it's going to get up anyway, but I just want to say that I appreciate all the work that Council has done. I know they've heard the complaints of the residents. I understand it's an issue on the street for everyone. At that last meeting, there were 17 residents in attendance, and several of those were couples representing individual households. I don't think that represents the whole street. And with that, I think there's a majority that haven't spoken on this, and to my mind, that requires a status quo. I also, though I didn't bring it, I also want to talk about the traffic report that we had done that came to council late 2017, early 2018. And the upshot from that, the wrap up, the very last paragraph of that said that Sydney's population's growing, and although the residents of Bonifant Road have been used to a certain kind of accommodation for a long time, everywhere around Sydney traffic is becoming an issue, and parking. And the observation was that a lot of the houses aren't using their off-street parking, and if more residents were willing to use their off-street parking and to walk more than 20 metres to their front door, that this actually wouldn't be so much of a problem if we just manage the parking on the street as it is. So I know it's going to go to the RMS, and this is great and all, but I just want to say I actually don't think we're necessarily making this decision with all of the residents of the street heard. And if you were to go with the status quo because you haven't heard from everyone, that's my gut feeling.
Thank you, Councillor. Anybody wishing to speak for the motion? Councillor Miles.
I'll speak for the motion. I think, as Councillor Williams said, this has been a very long process, and I think we can be confident that we've looked at all of the opportunities and different types of arrangements that could accommodate the residents. And it's not going to be all things to all people, unfortunately. But having squeezed that shared zone down to the size that it is, and to have listened, obviously, as the consultant has, and as council has, to residents to make sure that they're accommodated as best they can be. Yes, the status quo would have been fine if the police went down there fining people, but they are. I mean, I think all of our preference would have been for the situation to go on and for people not to get fined unnecessarily. But unfortunately, we're in a situation where we have to find a way for the residents to comply with standards set out by RMS and by the New South Wales Police, and I think that this is probably the best scenario that we could have hoped for. So, with that in mind, and I think our preference, as Councillor Crasso said, would be that we don't change the parking arrangements down there, but we do have to do something because people are getting fined if they do stagger their cars onto the footpath, which they've been doing for years. This is the opportunity to fix that problem in a legal way that means that residents aren't getting unnecessarily fined. And I think that we've looked at all those different scenarios, and this is basically as good as we're going to get.
Thank you, Councillor. Anybody wish to speak against? Are there any clarifications we need? I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? That's carried. Thank you. So we go back to 3.2, freedom of municipality. So we have a recommendation there on page 15. Councillor Collins, would you wish to speak to this?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Moved Councillor Collins, seconded Councillor Miles.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, we all know John Booth, and he's had numerous awards over the years. The Member of the Order of Australia, Right Citizen of the Year 97, Centenary Medal from 2001, and various awards from the Community Newspaper Association. So he's not, probably short on shelf space for these kinds of things. But the reason that I think that we should honour John Booth with this award is because we've actually never given him something from Hunters Hill. He's not a resident here, so he's not going to be Citizen of the Year or one of those ones. But this is a way for us to engage somebody who has been a great supporter of Hunters Hill, even though he may not be a resident. He's been a great friend of Hunters Hill. And briefly, the two main reasons that I think he's been such a force for Hunters Hill is the weekly Times that we all get in our letterbox for free, and we have a journalist here every week to write up what we decide and what initiatives we have. A lot of residents, this is how they find out about council. It's not in the national papers or state papers. So as far as locally based issues, having a local paper that is so supportive of our council that they actually have a journalist here every week to report on what goes on is a tremendous asset for this community. And if we can look at something specific that stems from that, is the period of our amalgamation, I don't know what we call it now, the battle, the troubles, all that happened. We had some great people within the community that led that battle. Two of them are in front of us right now, and Councillor Sanderson, Councillor Williams, and of course, look, we all played you all played your part, but if I can single out those two, and of course, Councillor McLaughlin. But you've got to have, you can have a voice, but if no one's telling the story, if no one's reporting on it, then, well, a protest in front of no one is not really an effective protest. Now John Booth got behind Hunters Hill very strongly, and part of his influence and sort of reporting on that was what made that such a successful community-led activist campaign, because our community newspaper really got behind it, and it was a great way to rally people together. So I don't want this to be about everything that John Booth has done throughout his life, because he's lived an incredible life and done lots of interesting things. But this is just an award to recognise what John Booth has done for Hunters Hill, because we've never actually formally acknowledged that. And I think this is just a nice way to do it.
Thank you, Councillor. Anybody wishing to speak against? Anybody wishing to speak? Councillor Williams.
Yeah, I'll speak against, Mr. Mayor. This has got no reflection on the person that's being nominated through Councillor Collins's motion. I've been involved in this process many years ago, and there is a process and there is a protocol to be followed in doing this. And I don't have any information before me in terms of a citation or whatever that gives me the detail. So I can't support it at this stage in its current form. There may be other ways that we could acknowledge Mr. Booth's contribution, but I think this is the highest order, and there is a process we need to go through to make sure it's done right. And as I say, there's no information in this motion that articulates all those things that Councillor Collins has been mentioning.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Anybody wishing to speak for the motion? Councillor Miles.
I'll speak for the motion, Mr. Mayor. Love him or lump him. John Booth has been a very large part of this community and the broader North Shore community and the community of the Inner West for a very long time. It's said that he's the only man that made John Howard take one step forward and two steps back for a photo. That could order him around at will. I, like probably everyone around this table, haven't always agreed with what he publishes in his paper, but it is, if nothing else, consistent. John Booth's editorial and paper is always at the doorstep, like clockwork. John's a local character, the like of which we probably won't see again. He's larger than life. You can always tell when he's in a room. In terms of his contribution to Hunters Hill, I think that's incontrovertible. The time that he has spent here, the amount of time he dedicates specifically to this council, even though, let's say by population we aren't the most significant in his circulation. The fact that he's given us precedence for a long time shows the love that he has for this community, and I have to say that I think that this is an appropriate reflection by this council of someone who has served Hunters Hill as a community for decades. I couldn't see a more appropriate way of honouring John Booth. I think it is warranted and deserved, so I'd recommend the motion.
Anybody wishing to speak against the motion? Councillor Sanderson.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I, again, am very appreciative of some of the things that John Booth has done. However, I simply cannot vote in favour of a motion where there are absolutely no reasons given. I think my experience of this process that I've witnessed before, as sitting in that gallery, that a great deal of information was available for the people that had to make that decision. I think we lack process. I can't support it in this form.
Thank you. We're wishing to speak for the motion. Against the motion?
Question, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Miles. Yes.
My understanding, and I have been in council for one such acceptance of a freedom of the municipality, and there was no process followed at the time that I saw. It just came to council and was voted on. Could you perhaps elaborate on what that looked like, if there was a procedure, which I'm fairly sure there wasn't, what that procedure is?
I wasn't the mayor at the time. I was a councillor. I think I was the deputy mayor at the time. The mayor consulted with the general manager. He spoke to me about it, and I believe he spoke to other councillors as well. Spoke to Councillor McLaughlin is saying he spoke to her. Did he speak to you at the time?
Yeah, about an hour before the meeting.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, so I'm not sure, but I think he spoke to all the councillors and they were all in agreement that we should give the accolade to Mr. Jenkins. That's my understanding. Other than that, I don't know anything else that was followed, but I know that he spoke to me for quite a while about it and what the pros and cons were. Was certainly went through the mayor. My recollection, it was a mayoral minute that was put to the council after consideration. That's how I understand it. But I wasn't the mayor at the time and I didn't initiate it. So, excuse me, I don't have more information. So, any further clarifications? I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? That's lost. The next one is item 3.3, underground car park, Gladesville Reserve. Councillor Miles, moved Councillor Miles, seconded Councillor Collins. Councillor Miles.
Mr Mayor, I actually have to thank Gully Coote for coming up with this idea. Gully's not here today, but I'm not going to claim credit for it. Gully actually pulled me aside and made this suggestion, and on investigations of my own, the more you thought about it, the more logical it seems. It is a priority of this state government to increase patronage and the regularity of the services along the Parramatta River. We know that the ferry stop down near Riverside Girls is one of our most regularly used ferry stops. Recently we passed a motion to investigate what we'll be doing with Gladesville Reserve and what could happen potentially with funding that's been granted to us by the state government. Essentially all this motion does is seek to clarify the position of the state government when it comes to potentially putting a commuter car park underneath Gladesville Reserve. I would see that being something that is funded through state or a mixture of state and council funding. I also see that as something that could be a potential revenue source for council, as it is a commuter car park, very much like the B line at Narrabeen, which is a car park that was designed as a commuter car park underneath a existing sports field at Narrabeen. Equally, at Abbotsleep, there's a similar parking arrangement. So you have a couple of situations down at Gladesville Reserve that have brought this on. One is that we are looking at what the future of that reserve will hold. Obviously, there is the proximity to the ferry stop, which, as a result, downstream means that there's a lot of commuter car parking along Huntley's Point already, which is an issue for the locals. So what this commuter car park could do, if the government accepted that it's something that we could proceed with, is remove all the cars off of Huntley's Point Road, which is a problem that's been exacerbated over many years. Again, with the girls that are of driving age at Riverside Girls, they could park in the commuter car park. It could be something that is Opal accredited, for example, so you can tap your Opal card and get a concession discount or get a discount if you're a commuter. So it's all about, I guess, synergising the ferry service, what's going to happen with Gladesville Reserve, along with proximity to the high school, and assisting the residents essentially that get hammered along Huntley's Point on a daily basis. And potentially, you could look at something like a 4-hour parking arrangement where you move as many cars as you can off of the road and into a commuter car park. You also have the possibility, given we're looking at our property strategy, and I hate to be too provocative, but a large opportunity for council citizens at the Bowls Club. You have the possibility, with investigating options at Gladesville Reserve, to have a in and out at both entrances to just opposite Gladesville, the Riverside Girls, and an entrance and exit at Henley Bowls Club. So this is all very high level at the moment. It's something that I'm just seeking some clarification on to write to the state government and to the minister to see what sort of appetite there is for this. There may be something that we can do in the medium term or in the short term. If there is funding available, it may be something that we can plan into the investigations with our upgrades to, or potential upgrades to, Gladesville Reserve. It's just a fact-finding mission as it is. I think it's worth looking at. It does sound like a large-scale project, but I think that doing some initial investigations, perhaps some high-level feasibilities at this point, at what sort of revenues that could bring in, what sort of issues on the streets of Huntley's Point it will help to mitigate, how it builds into our property strategy, and how we can help encourage people to use the ferry service along the Parramatta River. If it all stacks up, it seems to me like a worthwhile project.
Thank you, Councillor. Anybody wishing to speak against?
I just have a question through you, Mr. Mayor.
Who's your question?
I think it's the General Manager.
Thank you.
General Manager, there was a motion passed at the previous meeting or the meeting before about Gladesville Reserve. If this motion were to pass, would it slow down the research that's being undertaken with that previous motion, the feasibility?
Through Mr. Mayor, I think the first step, if this motion was supported, is to write to the state government to see if it, to use Councillor Miles's words, to see if there's an appetite for this or not. They might not support it, or they might be open to that. So I don't know that it would delay, and it's probably something that could be worked in tandem.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Williams.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Miles. You make reference here to undertake the required technical and feasibility studies. I'm not quite sure whether you're referring to the government doing that, or is that something that the council would, or in joint with the government?
I would envisage that given there is a tranche of state funding already made available by Minister Roberts for the upgrades to the plane service, that if we were to find funds through transport, for example, or Sydney Ferries to provide a commuter car park, that it would be much similar to the Gladesville Reserve, something that is done by council but in consultation with the state government. So I think it would probably be an arrangement where you would have to consult with the state government as to where the money is going. I mean, this is very high level, of course. It would be nice if we had the money, but I would say that if we're going to get some high level feasibilities done, or if we're going to get technical reports done, that would be done in conjunction with the state government.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further clarifications? Anybody wishing to speak against the motion? For the motion? Councillor Collins.
Thank you, sir. Look,
sorry, do you have a question? Or is that...
speak against it.
I'm sorry, Councillor Collins, I was a bit slow. Councillor Sanderson.
Mr. Mayor, I'm a little concerned that this proposal is a little bit premature. I think we should be seeking the views of our community before we go ahead with this. I can see numerous problems with it. My experience of ferry travel on the Parramatta River is that, generally speaking, the ferries are choppers in to put it that way, in peak hour. You get to Circular Quay and you wait forever to get off the ferry while you get a berth at the wharf. So I don't think there's huge potential there, but I think what we've got to think about more carefully is what benefit there is for our community. And certainly there are parking problems at both at Huntley's Cove and to an extent at Huntley's Point. So I think probably a more appropriate place to bring this up will be at one of our precinct meetings to see whether there's support locally for that. For the proposition before we go racing off to government and potentially putting funds into investigations that may have no future whatsoever.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Collins.
Thank you. Yeah, look, I think this. I think the motion that we have at the moment is simply to, contact the state government and see if there's an appetite for it. So I don't think we should rush out to the community, see what they think, then find out that there's no appetite for it. We have no money to do it, and it seems like a bit of a waste of time. I think it's the kind of innovative thinking that Huntersville needs. It is innovative, and in terms of the benefit, there is potentially a great opportunity for revenue for this council, and that's really what we need. Now, there is a long process between now and having an underground car park at Gladesville Reserve. Very long process, and I would imagine that if the state government don't have any appetite for it, I would imagine that's the end of the conversation. So, well, at least for now. So, it is simply just to write a letter, find out if it's worth looking into, and then moving forward. But to just say no to something just because it is innovative, or it's hard to say, innovative or controversial, before we've even found out whether there's funding available is the kind of it's the kind of obstructionist thinking that means that nothing gets done here. So let's just reach out, find out if we can do it, and then if they're interested, then perhaps we then go to the community and find out whether it's something that the community wants.
Thank you, Councillor. Anybody wishing to speak against the motion? Councillor Crassley.
Mr Mayor, I'd like to speak against the motion. I know it's high level at this stage, and I know it's just reaching out to the state government and asking if they have an appetite for this. But personally, I don't want to know if they have an appetite for it, because I don't like the idea. All the city planning and placemaking conferences I've been to over the last few years are steering away from public parking infrastructure, steering closer towards last mile delivery for passengers, and in fact New South Wales Government are already trialling an example of that just here in Hunters Hill towards Macquarie Park. So I also think that if the state government have money to put into infrastructure, I think they should be putting it into improving Victoria Road's route west. So for example, the B line that you speak about, there's a car park up there and it's a bus that takes people all the way into the city. It's not a thing that people can drive halfway to the city from out west, climb up Victoria Road, which is just still congested, and then park here and then catch a ferry and then get back in a car and then clutter up Victoria Road heading west again. I think personally, I think it's unwise of us to suggest to our residents that we're even exploring this idea. We need to improve transport to the west and advocate for that. We need to support the state government pilot projects for last mile delivery. And that's all. Oh, also that in the future, I think that driverless cars and electric cars are really, really not far away at all. And that will also, in fact, we trialled some at the Cities and Town Centres conference in Perth last year, and I think that will make that last mile delivery process quicker and easier as well. We need to free up Victoria Road, not just from here to the city, from here west. It's our duty, and I don't want to be part of soliciting a large car park in Hunters Hill.
Thank you, Councillor. Anybody wishing to speak for the motion? I'd like to speak for the motion. I think at this stage it's just an investigation to see what's available and what the state government's views on it are. I think that if there is an interest in this, we can take it to the community. It'll need to come back to council anyway. Even once we've done the study, we may not agree to do it, and that's where we'd have to do our consultation. So I'm in support of the motion. Anybody wishing to speak against the motion? Councillor Williams.
Yes, Mr Mayor. I share the comments that are already made in relation to not supporting this motion. I'm not quite sure what the purpose of this is. I've got no objection to writing a letter, but I do have an objection for it branding council as being supportive of a process which Councillor Crassoy is quite appropriately outlined, that hasn't, that probably won't solve the problem of transport, isn't within any of our planning horizons at the moment. And why are we jumping the queue with this sort of stuff? We are developing a property strategy at the moment. I would have thought something like this should go through that process to see whether it has any merits before we nail our letter to the flagpole and say, well, this is what council is thinking of asking the state government. There's no free lunches. I could imagine a car park of this size and magnitude would be, what, $10, $15 million worth? The state government's not going to stump up all that money, and council would be expected to meet its responsibility in relation to that. And I don't think there's any room in council's budget in the near future, if not the long term, to invest so much money in something that really is a commuter-driven issue. And as Councillor Crassoy has quite appropriately pointed out, the future is not about private motor vehicles. I went to the conference in Canberra last year where again they had these vehicles there. They're not far off, and we're not going to need these large built car parks to facilitate ease of movement around the city. And I agree, all we're doing is creating another Taj Mahal for people west of Sydney to come and populate, and it's not solving anything. So to me, it's a letter to the government, but to me it's a signal that council is interested in this. There's been no process gone through that I'm aware of that has engaged with the community. The community strategic plan doesn't reference it or mention it. Quite happy for it to go on to the next iteration, but more importantly, we're developing a property strategy at the moment, and I would have thought this sort of thing should come out of that process, balancing it against all the other competing needs in Hunters Hill. And my personally, a car park under Gladesville Reserve on the perimeter of our municipality is probably one of the lowest priorities in meeting the needs of our community. It may meet the needs of some commuters, but it certainly doesn't meet the broader Hunters Hill community's needs. So I speak against it.
Thank you. Anybody wishing to speak for the motion? Against the motion? Any clarifications required, councillors? I'll put the motion. Those in favour?
Right of reply, Mr Mayor.
Right of reply, I'm sorry. Please go ahead.
It's quite astonishing that we're having this reaction to writing a letter. My priorities are the constituents of Hunters Hill and their access to the ferry service. Where in an ideal world they do ride the bike or run to the ferry stop. This is the opportunity not for the hordes from Western Sydney or whatever it was that Councillor Williams referred to people west of here as coming to a Taj Mahal. No, this is a facility for locals to encourage them to use the ferry service that the government is increasing services on. So Councillor Sanderson's concerns about overcrowded ferries are allayed. I am astounded that this has had the reaction that it has. Commuter car parks are stock in trade of what state governments provide to constituents of this state. It is a very normal thing, and maybe electric cars will come along and solve those problems for us, and maybe we can use the commuter car park for a car park for Henley Bowls Club, whatever its future may hold. But to say a blanket no to an important piece of community infrastructure that could be being investigated, to say no to something that the state government could fund, to say no to a potential revenue source for this council in a time where we haven't seen a surplus budget in several years, seems to me lunacy, absolute lunacy. It is just high-level investigations at this stage. Saying no to this is bizarre, to say the least. I can't understand why you would not want to write a letter. It doesn't delay the process. It's something that is a cooperation with the state government if it ever comes about. It may never come about. They may have no appetite whatsoever for this. It may be such a white elephant as Councillor Williams is suggesting, but at the end of the day, we don't know if we don't write a letter. And that's all that this motion's asking you to do, is for probably 60 or 70 cents we can find out, and all of our fears can be allayed or innovations realised. So that's all I'm asking. Seems silly not to do it, but I'm in the council's hands.
Thank you, Councillor Miles. There are no questions or clarifications. I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? That's lost. 4.1. Development applications determined by the delegated authority. Thank you. Moved Councillor Williams, seconded Councillor Collins. Is that correct? Sorry, I'm looking the wrong way. Any questions? Councillor Craswell.
I do just have a question. I don't know why I've not asked it sooner. When the determination's made and they're required to plant a tree of a certain size in a certain size container, is there a time frame on how long, through you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Karifas, I imagine, is there a time frame on how long the person has to have planted that tree?
Through you, Mayor, there is not a time frame. However, consent only lasts 5 years. Our experience has been that once the tree branches have been taken away, they do immediately replace trees, but there's no time.
Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions? Put the motion. Those in favour? Against? That's carried.
Please note my abstention.
I didn't. Sorry. You will?
No. If you could, please.
So that's you voting against.
No, I'm abstaining because
conflict of interest. Thank you. Thank you very much. 4.2. Development applications. Moved Councillor Collins, seconded Councillor Craswell. You caught that one. Any discussion on this? I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? That's carried. Development applications. Moved Councillor Williams, seconded Councillor Crassoy. Any queries? Put the motion. Those in favour? Against? That's carried. 4.4. Legal matters. Moved Councillor Crassoy, seconded Councillor Collins. Any discussion? Any questions? I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? One more in favour of that? Against? That's carried. Thank you. 4.5. 9 Grey Street, Henley. Moved Councillor Crassoy, seconded Councillor Collins. Do we need any discussion on that? Councillor Crassoy, would you like to speak to that?
I'd just like to say congratulations to council. These battles are worth undertaking on behalf of our residents, and I know that it's a hard job and a long job and an expensive job, but I think it's very much worth it. So thank you, council.
Thank you, councillor. Are there any further comments or questions?
This is just a receive and note, so it's not, we don't have, we're not doing anything, you're just marking this as something that we've won in court.
Those in favour? Against? That's carried. Thank you. We go to 6.1, increase in PRCG membership fees, and that was discussed earlier. Councillor Collins?
Yes, I will move it.
Move Councillor Collins, second Councillor Crassoy. Councillor Collins.
I'll briefly speak to it. We've just had a presentation from the Parramatta River Catchment Group. I think they're doing a fantastic thing. I think it is a great objective they have, and I like that it's not too far off that we're going to have some swimmable areas around here. I would ask for a little bit more information on the financial situation of how these membership fees are determined. and I would like to see some financial reports of the entity, and that is going to be provided soon. So whilst I'm happy to support increasing it to 18,426 this year, I would like for this council to revisit how these fees are determined, because my understanding is that the highest level of membership is 28,000, and at 18,000, being such a small council, I think that perhaps we might be contributing more than our fair share. But anyway, I commend the motion. Thank the group for their work.
You want to make a note that additional information report from the group.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Councillor Williams.
Mr. Mayor, as the representative of council on this group, I agree that we need to look very carefully at our membership fees, but not to detract from the fact that this group has really achieved something phenomenal in terms of being able to, as a group of 13, 10 councils and 3 government agencies, being able to come together with the community with a vision and a strategy to actually deliver meaningful outcomes for our city and our part of municipality, or the Parramatta River. They're now moving in that phase from strategic planning into direct action. And actually, some of their earlier wins was Parramatta Park Dam or Lake. That's already, as part of this group's activity, now active swimming place, which it hadn't been for something like 60 years. So each part of the river is different, and as we heard from the presenters earlier on tonight, is impacted by a range of different factors. So there's not one size fits all, but the river has improved out of sight. From the early days when I was in the State Pollution Control Commission, getting out there sampling the waters back in the 70s, and you were lucky to get the vessel you were sampling with out before it dissolved. It was really quite a nasty place, and now we're talking about being able to swim in it, and there are already a couple of spots that are swimmable. So I think it's a very important initiative. It has impact directly on our community, because we're part of the catchment and part of the foreshore, but also has a much broader impact, not only within Sydney, but internationally. They were host of a major international conference late last year, which highlighted the innovation and the importance of which this group has been doing. So I'm curious myself as to how these fees are determined, and I think having a closer look at that would help satisfy us that we're going to be getting all that we're proportionally contributing to these enormous outcomes.
Thank you. Anybody wishing to speak against? For? Against? I'll speak for it. I think that the river has improved dramatically. I've noticed it in the last 30 years, just the incredible turnaround, and I think the proof is in the mangroves, which are regrowing all the way along the river. And around Haberfield, the number of mangroves are amazing, the way they've regenerated down there. So they tell me that's a rough sign of how you can tell whether the river's improving or not. I'd also like to thank Peter Astridge for his work on this committee over a number of years too, our current Citizen of the Year, before Councillor Williams took up the cause. So it's really great to see, and I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? That's carried. Thank you. Move to 9.1, minutes of the Access, Inclusion and Seniors Advisory Committee. We've got sorry, go ahead, please.
Through Mr. Mayor, councillors, there were a updated set of minutes that were circulated at the beginning of the meeting. Unfortunately, an earlier draft of minutes was included in the business paper.
Would you like to take just a minute to make sure you've seen them? Councillor Sanderson, are you happy with those minutes?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Moved Councillor Sanderson, seconded Councillor Williams. Is there any discussion? Councillor Sanderson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just make the point that this is the minutes of the first meeting of the merged Access, Inclusion and Seniors Advisory Group. I think it's been a very successful merger. There was duplication previously of the material of both meetings, and it seems to work well. I hope at the next meeting that we have better representation from the parents of children that are dealing with access issues. But I think this committee is going to work very well. And one of the points I made a point of congratulating the former chair of the Access Committee, Barbara Dorsch, AC, who is has driven that committee for quite a number of years and brought inclusion committee, all the access and inclusion issues to council's attention for a long period, and I hope the committee will continue on in the same vein. In fact, I'm quite sure it will. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. Any further comments, councillors? Councillor Craswell.
Just a question through you, Mr. Mayor, about the bus stop shelter upgrade through you to Mr. Karifas, I think. I understand our current bus stop thing is being negotiated as we speak, a contract. And I'm just wondering about where they've mentioned here about this wanting a shelter, and I know there's certain numbers, etc. And why I raise it is whether there's time to have it included in the contract, or whether, for example, there's one too many bus stop shelters at Baronia Park on Pittwater Road, on the corner of Pittwater and Princess Street, which I've raised before. And I'm wondering whether, as part of the contract, we can negotiate to have one of them taken away and put it here instead.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's something we can certainly ask the contractor, so we'll take that on notice. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor. Any further comments? Put your motion. Those in favour? Against? That's carried. Excuse me. Move to 9.2. Minutes of the Conservation Advisory Panel.
Move the recommendation.
Moved Councillor Williams, seconded Councillor Crassoy. Councillor Williams, did you
No, Mr. Mayor, there's no exceptions there. I think the minutes cover very well the issues that were discussed.
Thank you. Any further discussion required? I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? That's carried. 9.3 is the minutes of the 7th of April. Moved Councillor Williams, seconded Councillor Sanderson. Everybody, any further discussion? Councillor Williams?
Likewise, as with the previous, it's self-explanatory and there's no issues of exception there.
Thank you very much. I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? That's carried. Move to 9.4, minutes of the Gladesville Main Street Committee. Moved Councillor Crassoy, seconded Councillor McLaughlin. Councillor Crassoy, did you have anything you'd like to add? I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? That's carried. 9.5, one moment please. Here we go. Minutes of the Hunters Hill Village Main Street Committee. Moved Councillor Crassoy, seconded Councillor Williams. Any discussion? I'll put the motion. Those in favour?
There are some...
In favour? Those in favour? Against? That's carried. Councillor Crassoy, did you have a comment about it?
Well, just that there are some requests from that committee that council consider some things, so I'm assuming council have read those
The recommendations
and are happy with them, so.
.6. Report on councillor briefings held the 8th of April. Moved Councillor Collins, seconded Councillor Williams. Any discussion required? Put the motion. Those in favour? Against? That's carried. 12.1. Moved Councillor Crassoy, seconded Councillor McLaughlin. Councillor Crassoy, did you wish to speak to this?
Yes. So I attended this conference last year. It was a very worthwhile conference. They had speakers from all around the world on the topic of placemaking and town planning, city planning, particularly in small towns, and to which I made a small presentation available to the other councillors. There was a lot of food for thought at this, and I think it will guide us potentially. The reporting back can help guide us in our strategic planning and master planning and our placemaking and communication with our community going forward. I would strongly support council sending a member of staff along to it, and hopefully one of the councillors would also attend.
Thank you very much. Councillors, how do you feel about sending somebody along to this?
Yeah.
Are in favour?
Absolutely.
Can I get an idea who's in favour, who's against? I'm in favour. Against? Thank you. So, Councillor Crasso, are you keen to attend again this time?
I would be delighted to attend, yes.
All right. I think we probably need to deal with that. Is everybody in favour of Councillor Crasso attending on our behalf?
Aren't we going to speak to the motion first before we...
We should do that. You're quite right. So I'll put the motion. Those in favour?
Sorry, I haven't spoken to the motion. I think we can have an opportunity to speak whether or not we send...
It was moved Councillor Crasso. So who wishing to speak against? Councillor Collins.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I'm sure it looks like a worthwhile conference, but you know, today IPART approved a 9.7% grade increase. Next week we're having an extraordinary meeting to deliver another budget deficit, which has happened for the last, it's been in deficit for the last 10 years, except for 1 year when we sold a car park. At this point in time, when we are around such financial pressures, I wonder if it's appropriate to send the council to Tropical Queensland for a conference to be held in a casino. It includes a day trip to Magnetic Island. The way that we balance a budget is that we just cut back on the things that we really probably could do without. I'm sure there's some great food for thought there. I'm sure you could get the notes from somebody else. We haven't yet had the presentation on last year's conference, and I know that was because it was you know, another briefing matter went over time. So it's but we haven't revisited that. We haven't come back to what we've learned from the former conference last year. We need to start implementing big ideas that evolve from these conferences before we can justify going to them. And at the moment, I can't see anything that has been gained from going to these things. And at this particular time, when the community is concerned about the financial position of council, it is completely inappropriate to send a councillor to the tropics at this time. So I'm against it.
Anybody wishing to speak for? Who wishing to speak against?
Right reply.
Yes? Right reply.
Mr Mayor, this is exactly how we get better at what we do and how we get better at delivering for our community when they want us to deliver. Sending one of your councillors or one of your council staff to recently flooded and devastated Townsville to learn about how they're rebuilding is actually a perfect opportunity for us. We need to stop making bad infrastructure ideas that are uninformed about the way things are being done around the world, because some of our councillors haven't had the opportunity to learn at these conferences about what is being done all over the world. This is an opportunity for council to keep improving what we do, and I didn't want to have to refute something against this because I think it's so important. I knew this conference was coming up. I've foregone any councillor training and any other conferences all year because this is the one that I think is worth attending, and it's the one that I think will enable me to deliver better outcomes for our decision making and for our community. I'm happy to pay for myself to go.
Thank you, Councillor. Anybody wishing to... that was right, a reply. Do you have a question?
But I do just have a question. Each councillor, through you, Mr Mayor, to the General Manager, there is a budget for this.
in place.
Through
you, Mr Mayor. The council's budget does allocate for councillor professional development. There's not a set amount for individual councillors. There is a pot of money that councillors can apply to undertake professional development, what they see as their needs.
And the second question, if I could. And it is a requirement of all councillors to undertake professional development in the course of a 12-month period every year?
Through you, Mr Mayor, it is. And most recently, new requirements were brought in that require us, as part of our annual report, to list professional development activities of the councillors for the prior year.
Thank you. Question, first of all, Councillor Williams, please.
I was just going to speak in favour of the motion.
Well, we've already gone to, we're at the end of the process. Do you have a question?
I have an amendment to make.
Well, I think we are, because you had right of reply, so I think we've progressed to that.
okay.
So, Councillor Collins, question?
Amendment.
It's done. It's done.
We've already done it.
Well, then can I get clarification? I mean, I was simply.
Unfortunately, you're a little late in the process.
Well, I have a question. Is that not going to be
Question, absolutely.
Well, I mean, are councillors going to pay for their own interstate travel or not? Was that the offering, or is that, I would like to amend that that's what we do. Councillors want to travel interstate to these conferences, then they can take it out of their councillor fees. That's quite fair.
Well, first of all, we've had the debate and we've got to right of reply. You can ask a question, we can note your question, but we've got to the end of the debate and we actually need to put the motion. When we get to the end of the right of reply, we need to put the motion. However, we will make your note that should councillors pay for their own travel costs to go to conferences, and we'll come back to you. I think not.
Interstate conferences.
Interstate conference, any conference. I think not. I think travel's part of training budget. If you have to go to a conference that happens to be in another state, we should pay for it. But I'll ask the General Manager to clarify that at another time. All right, so I'll put the motion. Those in favour, against, that's carried. Thank you. Councillors, do we have any further business? Councillor Crasso.
Mr Mayor, please advise me. I'm not sure when's the right time to raise the issue of the bike plan that
I think you could raise it now if you like.
Dr. Sharp. Would it require a motion for me to ask council to consider putting the bike plan back into?
I don't think so. I think if you'd like the General Manager to consider it.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I might ask the Acting Director of Corporate Services to discuss the best process, particularly given we have the extraordinary meeting next Monday to consider the draft budget.
Mr Mayor, it is listed in the budget papers, the draft budget papers prepared for next week as a deferral on the budget, so it's up to council if they wanted to consider bringing that back. The reason it was, well, obviously we're looking for some savings to try and get as close to a balanced budget as we could, but my memory is it was actually designated to happen after 2019-20 in the delivery program, so we've aligned the budget to that, but it's up to the council next week if they want to consider bringing it back. We have, as I say, if it had been a balanced budget, we probably wouldn't have looked at it in that light, but certainly as we look for ways to make some savings, that's one we've put forward.
If I might, we're very late in the budget process to be changing the budget, I would think. It's not too late, and obviously
just found out it was being taken out.
And as the year goes on, I'm sure we'll have other suggestions to add to the budget, so it's not quite that late. But let's talk about it when we get to that next meeting. Who else? Councillor McLaughlin.
I'd just like to update the council on a particular matter. I do believe that there is a report coming to council on the Public Art Committee. I did notice as probably other committees have put things in, but we just haven't got the report done yet. I just want to announce that for a while now, the committee and council have been liaising with the RMS to secure some additional funding to continue the rollout of the historic photograph program on our utility boxes. And I'm pleased to announce that we have received that funding under a joint venture between council and the RMS. They are very, very keen to roll out 10 more utility boxes for us at no cost to council. And they want to complete them by this financial year, i.e. by the end of June 30. So that is fantastic news. They are so pleased with this program that they're thinking of rolling it out, or wrapping all of their utility boxes moving forward. So, that's a really good outcome for nationwide.
Excellent.
So our little committee has been chugging along nicely behind the scenes, and we're getting some gains, which is good. So
Thank you, Councillor.
there will be a report to council in the next couple of weeks.
Any further business? Can I close the meeting, councillors? I'll close the meeting at 9:07 p.m. Thank you very much.